Hello, everyone.
Hey, folks.
Hi, guys. We're here.
We are here. I have so many people checking in on Facebook and other social media. Like it's really kind to
Very.
to know that there are people out there that care, including our listeners too. Very
Oh,
Esther
gosh.
reached
Yes.
out and as well as
Yes.
several others. I thought that was very sweet.
Yeah. People from other parts of the world reaching out. And I think even if you live in this part of the world, it's hard to conceptualize Los Angeles. And not that like anyone pinpoints exactly where we live or anything, but I know it looks really horrific on television. It is really horrific in terms of the fires. And then like Emily just said in the chat, we got 3 more inches of snow last night, other parts of the country, and our guest today was also digging himself out,
Yeah,
so this could be called like a fire and ice episode. What is going on?
we're nothing
Uh,
if not extreme.
yes, yes, yes. Well, welcome everyone. We do just, wanna acknowledge there's a lot going on. Dr. Scott and I are safe. We were just chit-chatting about our air quality not being too terribly bad where we're at. Actually, out my way, it's a pretty beautiful day. The further you go east, the winds just aren't hitting this way. So it's been a productive, nice Saturday, although I've had the death and destruction on my television, which I know is just not good, but
Yeah.
it's been in the background all day. What else
Yeah,
we got going on,
and
Dr. Scott?
not to minimize any of the horrific damage. There's just been catastrophic damage to Pacific Palisades, to Altadena, to a number of unbelievable historical structures are gone. Will Rogers, very, very famous mansion that was the ranch house mansion that was turned into a museum, that's gone. The Theosophical Society in Altadena, which was like,
Mhm.
for me being the woo-woo that I am, like this repository of unbelievably rare manuscripts and texts about theology and philosophy, that's gone.
I
And
grew
we're
up in Altadena, right? My dad had a house there until I was in
no,
high school. Well, right after high school when he moved up north.
I did not know that. See, you're just
Yeah,
constantly revealing yourself.
I know, just a little bit at a time. Maybe
You're
in the
just gonna
next
one of
20
these days,
years,
like
you'll learn
right
more.
at like our last episode, you're gonna reach down and pull
Mhm,
off a latex mask, and you'll
mhm.
be one of those humanoid reptiles that lives under Los Angeles.
That's right, and you never knew.
I never knew.
Do I
Nicest
even know
reptilian
you?
I ever met.
The book you can write about being friends with me and doing a podcast with
Yeah,
me. Yeah, a lot of loss we won't even know really, what all is lost, until this settles, and it feels like it's not going to, but it will, certainly will. There's been amazing resilience in wonderful cities all around this country that have come back from other insane natural disasters with just amazing resiliency. So I don't doubt that we will be the same. With that, do you just want a reminder about like changes for 2025?
yeah. Folks, just as a reminder, our format is going to change a little bit here in the new year. We're going to be going, instead of 2 full episodes a month, we're definitely going to be bringing you at least 1 full episode a month. Sometimes, if we go on and on and on, and it ends up being a 2-hour or more than 2-hour episode, we'll probably split it up into hour chunks and release them just a day apart.
Mhm.
Um, but then we'll also be releasing our live streams here from behind the couch, as a separate standalone episode, uh, so that you get 2 chunks minimum a month of
Yeah.
our content. And then for just as a reminder for those of you who are our Patreon members, we will also have additional check-ins. We'll jump on every once in a while with our Patreon for a live stream, or we'll do a shrink wrap, which is just us completely chatting back and forth ad nauseum for sometimes up to about 40 minutes, just to
Yeah.
talk about what's going on. It's a little bit clinical, but it's more just relaxed and processing almost.
Yeah, and Dr. Scott and I talked about, actually sitting down and calendaring those, so, It's just not like, hey, this is happening tomorrow, but maybe we can plan a little bit better. So with that, our newest Patreon members, we would love to welcome at the associate level, Caroline B. and Julia. And then at the intern level, we have Cindy. So thank you guys so much for joining in the last month. If you're at the doctoral level, remember you are entered into a merch giveaway every month. Our last two winners of 2025 were for November, Thalia, and for December, Akiko. So we will be in touch. Akiko, I already reached out to her on our Discord channel today to congratulate her. Told her to pick out a piece of merch and we'll send it her way. So now that it's January, that will reset. Everyone at the doctoral level is put back into the pile from which we pick. And it happens every single month, even though we sometimes get behind, forget, but we will always do it and come back to it. So,
And we apologize also for not getting out a holiday card to our Patreon members as we usually do. This year was just trying to figure out from our travels over the past few months whether or not it could be in the budget. So,
yeah. Yep.
you'll be getting a little bit of extra swag in the next month. We'll have to celebrate, Chinese New Year, the dragon or something like
There
that.
you go.
Right. So today we are following up from a wonderful collaboration that we had in the Berkshires for Josh Hallmark's Berkshires Podcast Festival, where the idea for today's topic came up. I'm telling you, we get some really, really great ideas from people that are our colleagues and our fellow creators. And we want to welcome today Justin Evans. Welcome. Big claps, everyone. Justin is a prominent and well-known host of the Generation Y podcast, highly, highly rated, highly regarded, which he co-founded in 2012. And this podcast, Generation Y, played a key role in pioneering the true crime genre within the podcasting landscape. We're talking to a true OG here today. And in addition to his work on Generation Y, Justin also hosts the Peripheral podcast, which is a unique show that gathers deeply personal stories from listeners about subjects that are often considered taboo or shameful. One of the things I'll say about this is I love how incredibly respectful it is. I think that there are other podcasts out there that try to do what Justin is doing, and they don't come anywhere near the quality and just authenticity that he's able to create. Each episode of Peripheral explores a new theme, shedding light on the complex and often overlooked aspects of the human experience. Welcome.
Hey, thank you so much.
I feel like your beard has grown another foot since we saw you last.
It really has, and I haven't been to the stylist in a while to get it trimmed because why bother?
I mean, why bother?
You're moving
it's so
into
good to
epic
see
beard
you.
territory.
Yes.
Yeah. I echo. Peripheral is so good. It literally is just a conversation. And there's so little of that. Very lightly produced, just a conversation with folks about their experiences in life. The only thing that I think holds a match to it is, I don't know if you're familiar with a YouTube channel called The Soft White Underbelly.
Yeah.
But that is almost a visual version in a sense of what you did with Peripheral. So
yeah, this Soft White and This Is Actually Happening, I think.
okay.
Because I was kind of inspired by This Is Actually Happening for the Peripheral, so I got to give him a little bit of credit.
Heck yeah. Yeah. Why not? No, it's a wonderful show, and Scott and I have really enjoyed the conversations we've had with you on there as well. So this again, we just get to chit chat with our friends when we get in person, and different things happen. And Scott jumped into a panel with Justin and Aaron at Berkshires. Justin and I got to collaborate on a fun little weird story roundtable with listeners at the event. And then, of course, we were having a side conversation about our topic today, and just knew that this would be the perfect format for it. So just to jump in and kind of orient everyone a little bit. And they're probably like, why the heck are you talking about this now? Because God, it's been well over a year, which is kind of crazy since Matthew Perry's death. And we even said that when we were talking about doing this, and we thought, well, why would there be a time limit on having a conversation like this, right? So we're talking about Matthew Perry, renowned for his role as Chandler on Friends, who passed away on October 28th, 2023. And he was 54 years old. He was found unresponsive in the hot tub of his Los Angeles home, and he was pronounced dead at the scene. An autopsy later determined that his death resulted from the acute effects of ketamine, with contributing factors including drowning and coronary artery disease. And we will absolutely circle back to a lot of that and more. But yes, a lot unfolded in the investigation. But Justin, I'm wondering, what was it about this case, and then really like that preliminary chunk of information that we had at the beginning, that resonated with you? Because there's just so many different pathways that veer off from a case that seemingly we've heard a million times before, right, with celebrities.
Yeah, and I guess I hear so much, I won't even call it misinformation, but just the way people put things, the way people put things in context. And when it comes to drugs and addiction and things like that, I always have an open ear to what people are saying. But when it came to Matthew Perry's death from ketamine, I was like, okay, the chances of someone dying from an overdose of ketamine are pretty slim. Now, not impossible, but pretty slim. And being a true crime person, if I walked into a room and somebody's face down in a hot tub,
Mm-hmm.
I think drowning. I think they water, and when they put acute effects of ketamine first and then contributing drowning, I'm like, well, he fell in. He was still alive when he fell into the hot tub, and he sucked water into his lungs, and he was unable to
Mm-hmm.
get out of the hot tub. So to me, the cause of death is drowning with a contributing factor of ketamine. And it's such a tiny switch there.
Yeah.
But to me, it's really important to get it right, because I think it stigmatizes a lot when you just say the drugs are the problem and da 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 da. And that might not sound like a big deal to a lot of people, but to me, it's huge, because if somebody wrapped their car around a tree, you wouldn't say, oh, they died from alcohol poisoning. They died from wrecking their car and they were under the
Blunt
influence of
force
alcohol.
trauma. Yeah.
Yeah, and so it's the same logic for me. And it seems like a small thing, but it's a big deal, because I just feel like it stigmatizes drug use and puts it out at the forefront all the time.
Yeah.
And I guess, why would someone care about that? Why do I care so much? And it's because, hey, when I was a kid, and I'm sure when you guys were younger, marijuana was bad. Marijuana would make you do the worst things ever. And then when you find out that that wasn't exactly true, it makes you stop, recognizing authority and the truth of the matter. And you just think, well, I'm going to throw all this out. And something like ketamine, it's now being used medicinally. So I'm like, if we're going to stigmatize things, maybe we should think, about how we say things. And that's why I took such an issue with this. And again, a lot of people might just be like, that's a tiny little switch, but to me, it means the world, because it puts his cause of death as a drug, as opposed to what happened while he was on it.
Right. Yeah.
Well, it seems I think you're touching on something that needs to be discussed and talked about more openly and more thoroughly. And stay with me for a second, because I got to give an example of how the narrative changes. Are you guys old enough to remember The Love Boat?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, stick with me.
So where are we going?
One of the main actors on The Love Boat was Julie, who was the crew's social manager, played by actress Lauren Tews, and very, very popular character. And it was huge news at the time when she got released from the show, because she had a really serious problem with cocaine. And the public, the press had a field day. Public reviled her. She was just this lost cause, drug addict. And, the cast, I think her colleagues were trying to be supportive, but, it was just limited because the overarching narrative is this bad person who did this bad thing, who was morally corrupt. And, they talk about it now in a recent sort of get together with the surviving actors. They say, in today's world, if that happened to an actor on set, there would be a completely different approach.
Hmm.
There would be like everyone, the company would come forward, not only for liability's sake, but really because the culture has shifted. Like, what can we do to help this person succeed? Right.
Hmm.
So, on one hand, we do see that, I think, pretty prominently. And yet, look at what we did. Look at how the narrative around Matthew Perry changed very quickly, to exactly what you're talking about, Justin. Instead of like this accident, death by drowning, which was aggravated by these other circumstances. But what they want to do is like, well, here's somebody that's so untouchable and had all this money and all this success. We're just going to project all of our cultural nastiness onto him. And I think it's an easy target. So I think that, like, as far as we've come in the discussion about recreational drug use, what's acceptable and what's not acceptable, it's just like,
Yeah.
what's acceptable is what we've choose to legislate versus what we haven't, right?
Yeah.
That has to be part of the conversation as well.
Yeah.
Um,
And I guess I think of like when I first started learning about systemic racism or things like that.
Mhm.
Like there's nuanced things that that aren't in your face, but they're just how things always have been. And then you learn more and you're like, oh, they're wording it this way
Yes.
with intention. And with the Matthew Perry death, it was not only worded that way, but even in the autopsy report, acute effects of ketamine. And I'm thinking to myself, he had ketamine in his system. He had a Suboxone in his system. It helps you get off opioids. All of these things cause dizziness, make you disoriented. I mean, ketamine itself will just, you can, you can disassociate,
Yeah.
so
Yeah.
it's like, so his motor skills are impaired. He's dizzy. He might not even know where he is. And then he falls into water. And we
Mhm.
know he was still alive because he sucked water into his lungs. So it's like every step of the way here, he's on this drug that other people are giving him, and we'll get to them in a minute. But it was obvious that it was the things that he was on and the problems he had that caused him to fall into this pool of water, and then he was unable to even get himself out of it.
Yeah.
And that's very important to me, because it's like, well, why, if alcohol is, drunk driving is bad, well, why is it bad? Because you lose your motor skills.
Sure.
And ketamine is, doing the same thing. You shouldn't get behind the wheel on it, but there are other uses of ketamine. And if we're stigmatizing it so badly, and it's just like my comparison to systemic racism, the more you find out how stigmatized drug use is, you start to see how it just, even in an autopsy report, which I would expect to be official and more precise, they list ketamine first. And
I have a question just because
Yeah.
I had a little bit of a preconceived notion, and honestly, it doesn't
Yeah.
terribly matter for this conversation.
you're good.
But you're talking about him falling in. Was
Yeah.
that determined in the investigation? Because do you remember how, like, the night before, there was that picture taken of him sitting and relaxing in his hot tub
Yeah.
that was making, kind of the rounds? And, I was just thinking, gosh,
He might
he
not have
just
fallen. He might have just
yeah.
slid under.
Right,
Absolutely.
right, right,
Yeah.
right. Yeah. Again, not terribly important
Well,
for the purposes of this,
Yeah.
but I think, no, I don't, I'm not so sure, Dr. Shiloh. I think you have a really good point, is that
Yeah.
if we're going to talk about contributing factors, hot tubs and jacuzzis have a very, very checkered history since the beginning.
Yeah.
People dropped dead constantly from overuse and unregulated use and uneducated use of hot
Yeah.
tubs when they were introduced to America, especially here on the West Coast. People were like chugging back, 2 or 3 bottles of wine with their friends, and then 4 people would be found dead in a hot tub. I mean, I promise you, I'm not saying that for humorous relief. It actually
Yeah.
happened.
Yeah.
But
But
look,
drinking out, yeah.
no, go ahead, Jeff.
Doing anything in a hot tub can make it worse, like alcohol, ketamine, whatever it is, because
Right.
the heat and the water and everything is gonna pump up your heart rate. It's gonna pump up your everything. It's gonna make all this circulate through your body faster. And
Mhm.
yeah, it is very much a good point to bring up, because if he was
Right, and
already in there when he was on the ketamine, he could
yeah,
absolutely. Yeah.
it's funny that they show pictures and people like relaxing, and it's this sort of it indicates like a level of luxury that people experience. But you're not supposed to stay in a hot tub for more than 20 minutes at a time. You're supposed to get
Oh,
out,
stop it,
cool
Dr.
down.
Scott. You're just
I mean,
ruining my life.
I know. I'm like, you can still get back in, but you have to give your body a break. But
Yeah.
let's recenter back on Matthew Perry, who, by the way, if um, you know, people forget also that Matthew was really a gifted, very, very gifted performer and gifted creator. If you only knew him from Friends, which is really wonderful, and his comic timing is really great, whether or not you like the show, I mean, you have to admit that his timing is really great. He was also in a short-lived series called Studio 66 on the Sunset Strip. It was like a
Mm.
sort of a behind the scenes of a Saturday Night Live show. And it's an Aaron Sorkin show. One of the best shows ever, like where you really see like what a brilliant actor he and the other cast members are. But Matthew Perry fully admitted over the past few decades that he has had a long and challenging history with substance abuse and addiction. And the investigation revealed that we started in on earlier that he had been undergoing legitimate ketamine therapy for depression. It is quickly becoming an evidence-based practice. There is a lot of research behind ketamine for its uses in rapidly alleviating symptoms of long-term intractable depression, as well as some other conditions as well. So when we say legitimate ketamine therapy, we mean it's legit. But when reputable clinics refuse to increase his dosage, and just to put a pin in here, that's a very important part of any type of treatment that uses a particular substance for outcomes. He turned to illicit sources, and the individuals charged in connection with his death allegedly sold ketamine to Perry at very inflated prices and attempted to cover their tracks following his passing. And we're going to get to the criminal investigation part in a second, but it seemed like medias and consumers were just eager to know more about ketamine, especially in how it was implicated in his death. And again, this is where the wording started to get manipulated in the narrative, I believe.
Yeah.
Yeah, and we've had celebrities pass away from seemingly unintentional overdoses and a lot of cocktails of things, usually with alcohol. But I feel like this is really the first one I remember where ketamine was mentioned, and it's like it really piqued the interest
Yeah.
of media and then consumers, definitely. And Justin, I know you just briefly kind of looked into the rates of death across the country when it comes to ketamine. And really, like, if we're just narrowly thinking ketamine overdoses, what are some of the things that you found when you're looking into this?
So it didn't specifically say what year, but it was a study from 2022, and it said of 312 overdoses, 138 deaths.
Okay. Okay.
138 deaths
Mhm,
nationwide over the course of a year.
mhm.
Then there was a CDC study that said that ketamine was detected in 912 overdose deaths, but the majority of those deaths had fentanyl or other toxic chemicals, whatever drugs in their system. So even if we went with the high number, let's just say 900,
Mhm,
900 deaths,
mhm.
but the number's probably closer to 138. But even if we go with 900, I mean, I found reports of tapeworms killing almost that many people every year.
Yeah,
you
yeah.
know, there's so many other just things that will, I mean, opioids. How many does
Oh,
that kill? How many does cars kill? How many do guns kill? You know, even at 900 deaths, if we're taking the larger number, which I don't think is accurate at all, that's not a lot. And it shows how hard it is to overdose on ketamine and actually have a fatality from it.
Yeah. I mean, the fentanyl, the other things are doing the heavy lifting in even those 900, certainly. And that's why those are epidemics. Those are public health crises that this country is finally starting to pay attention to and hopefully do something about, right? And
Yeah.
we'll talk about kind of the legal implications at the end of today. But um, I think this goes back to your point of we don't want to fear monger, lead with the ketamine piece, and have this end up being, a unsubstantiated war on ketamine, or again stigmatizing the individual that is using it for legitimate purposes, or someone who has struggled with the addiction issues like Matthew Perry had.
Yeah, because how many hot tub deaths are there?
Oh, we should have
I
looked that up.
ChatGPT, how many?
It might kill more than ketamine does.
It might. Someone look it up. There's all those warnings on the signs posted by hot tubs, right?
Hot tub deaths per year.
Yeah, let's do it.
300.
300.
300. That's more than 138.
I am more risky
Definitely.
than someone experimenting with ketamine.
So just to give a little bit of background, this is I almost wish at times I had gone to med school to become a psychiatrist, because I'm so fascinated with psychopharmacology, and where we are in the treatment of mental illness is just light years away from where it was 60 years ago, where we had a very, very limited arsenal of effective medications. And our medications have gotten better and better and better through, research and development. But one of the things that I have to explain to people who come into my office for long-term depression and long-term anxiety is that I get them to visualize what would happen if they just paced in a room with a thick carpet, but they kept repeating the same path. There's no deviation from the path. One corner to the back to the next, back and forth, back and forth. Eventually, they're going to wear down a pattern in that rug. And actually, that's a metaphor or visualization for what happens to our brain when we are really, really severely impacted by long-term chronic depression, anxiety, worry, and any number of sort of permutations of mental health challenges. And it's not just a virtual metaphor. You actually change your neurology when you are caught in long-term symptomology like this. And one of the things that ketamine has been found to do, which is different from all the other medications. Now, maybe if you take a medication for generalized anxiety disorder, what will happen is that your brain can recuperate once it is alleviated from the burden of these ongoing symptoms. But it takes a lot of time. What we found out from research is that ketamine actually can speed up that process very, very quickly because it actually promotes neuronal growth, which is it's a game changer.
Yeah.
And it definitely affects this particular substance in the brain called glutamate, which you can take as a supplement. We don't know if really taking it as a supplement makes a difference in your system. But what we do know is that too little glutamate is very bad and too much glutamate is very bad. Too much glutamate is found in people generally with schizoaffective disorder or things like schizophrenia. But the right amount, your baseline may have gone underneath if you've been struggling with depression for a long time. So it's legit. It started off as an anesthesia or anesthetic drug, then was used really well in pain management, used for seizures. It's great. But now it is FDA approved for treatment-resistant depression. Treatment-resistant depression is a whole other game. You don't really hear about it as much because those people are so impacted by this intractable set of symptoms. And what we're finding now with ketamine is it can be very successful for long-term intractable depression, long-term intractable forms of anxiety, rapid relief of symptoms. People diagnosed with PTSD and CPTSD are claiming that they're having really, really significant levels of success. Some of the problems, though, that we're going to talk about in a little bit after our example here are the fact that just ketamine clinics exploded very, very quickly. And that's not always a good thing. Just because something is super, super effective doesn't mean that the people who took a weekend certification on how to use it are the best purveyors of this particular new therapy.
Do your research.
Do your
Cannot
research.
stress
Yes.
that enough.
Because there's ketamine clinics all over Kansas City now, and
Mhm.
then you have ketamine by mail,
Oh,
Joyous and Mind Bloom. And when you're doing a ketamine treatment, you're supposed to be, highly observed and like given
yes.
Controlled environment.
yeah,
Yeah.
very controlled environment. And you're supposed to set intentions. You're supposed to even
Yes.
work through your PTSD or go through therapy while you're on it, things like that. But it's just like a marijuana card. You can call up, go on a telehealth, telepresence, whatever appointment, pay your $50 to pass go. They'll give you a prescription and they'll send it to your house for $100 a month. Pretty much, I'm sad, and they'll send it to you.
Wow.
And then you're on your own taking it. And I think Matthew Perry was doing legitimate treatments and then getting it on the side. And he was like double, tripling his doses, so he was getting injections and he was doing the troches. So yeah, he was
Mm.
double, triple dosing it every day up until his death.
So that just to piggyback on that statement right there, or that bit of information, that has passed over from legitimate treatment efforts it fell into his domain of addiction. And,
Yeah.
addiction is not this rubber stamp template that every person looks alike. Every addict has a different genetic makeup, or they have a different reason for what pulls them into these behaviors. There's a number of reasons for the behaviors that keep them in that lifestyle or in that set of challenges. And again, I think we're talking about a bigger overarching theme of there's nuance and there's really uncomfortable conversations that we need to have as a culture about what certain things do, what choices people make, and also why we are feeling the way we're feeling. These are really, really tough times in our culture,
Yeah.
and people are falling back on not particularly healthy ways to take care of themselves. And I mean, I'm going to make a little bit of a broad statement, because addiction is a nine-headed hydra monster. Like, it's always going to find insidious ways to get into our lives. But, class plays a role in this as well. And one of the things that we'll talk about in the treatment of addictions is that, it's really bad when someone has a long, long way to fall. And when I mean a long way to fall, if you have a lot of money, if you have a lot of means, it means that there will always be somebody there to scoop up and clean up after. So you have further and further distance between the ramifications of your actions and the consequences. So I mean, I know that's a generalized statement, and I don't want to minimize anybody's struggle with addiction, but some people have a long way to fall, and that's not a good thing.
Yeah. And with
Very true.
Matthew Perry, he had a long way to get to rock bottom. He had a lot of money. And then he had these people that were being very predatory and taking advantage of him, taking his money, encouraging him to buy more, enabling him. Not to say that he wouldn't have done it without them, but they absolutely were a key factor in enabling and progressing his addiction problem with ketamine.
Yeah, supply and demand, right? There will be someone there for that as well. Let me just fill in, folks. So following the months after his death, I mean, a really comprehensive investigation ended up leading to the indictment of 5 people, that came out in August of 2024. Among those charged were Perry's personal assistant, Kenneth Iwamasa, 2 doctors, and 2 drug dealers. And these individuals were accused of basically conspiracy, is how they went at this. Conspiracy to provide Perry with illegal supplies of ketamine, but also wrapped into that conspiracy, they really highlighted exploiting his struggles with addiction for their own financial gain, which they were able to, look at through text messages and things like that, their communications back and forth. I think it was pretty notable that his personal assistant, Kenneth, lacked any medical training. He had been the one administering the ketamine injections to Matthew Perry, including multiple doses on the day of his death. So, this was a big operation. This happened here in Los Angeles County. It was all over the news everywhere, I know, but, definitely highlighted. And with the way Scott and I kind of interact with different law enforcement agencies here in Los Angeles, it felt like it was prominent for a very long time and took up a lot of time and space in the legal criminal justice system here in Los Angeles. But I'm curious about your thoughts, Justin, as to how this was investigated, like the priority behind it, and especially the attention it was given, being that a celebrity was dead at the center of all of it.
Well, I think of the two-tier legal system that we have. And most of the time people think of that as, oh, if you're rich, you can get away with a crime. Where if you're poor, you can't afford the lawyer, you can't afford the defense. But there is the other half of the two-tiered legal system, which is how much are they going to investigate a crime against you? And this
when
is
you're the victim.
Yeah, when you're the victim. And if my example is my sister, she died from a fentanyl poisoning. She thought she was buying heroin. It was pure fentanyl. And the police came to the house. They looked at her body and said, yep, she's dead. Looked at my mom and said, yeah, she's dead. And then they, kind of looked around the kitchen, even though my sister's body was in the basement. By the time I got there, my sister's body had been removed. The needle was still there. The foil ball with the fentanyl was still there. And the cops didn't look at my sister's phone or anything. They just, she's dead and another dead junkie, I guess. And they move on. And so that's this other half, or the other part of the two-tiered legal system, is the investigation into Matthew Perry's death. Yeah, they did what they were supposed to do. And I feel like, you can get busted for possession or you can get busted for distributing. But when somebody dies from your drugs, I don't see the follow-up in a lot of deaths from fentanyl or other drugs. And over time, I have an anecdotal story, so that's just me. But for the most part, I don't see the investigations going the way they did for Matthew Perry or Michael Jackson or the Luigi guy who shot the CEO of the, health,
right.
United Health. I mean, shootings happen every day. Overdoses happen every day. But here we have a high profile person who's the victim. And now our law enforcement will go after it because they know all eyes are on them. But it's like, well, why can't you treat everybody that way?
Yeah. And thank you for sharing that. We had previously talked with Justin about sharing that story, and, we're heartbroken for you when we learned of this, when it happened. And it is a deeply personal story. Do you find that your views changed, maybe not on like the two-tier aspect to it, but had you considered, like, when someone dies, should the supplier be held accountable for that? Because again, we're getting into that nuance, right? Like, okay, Matthew Perry took drugs and decided to get into a hot tub. Did that evolve for you at all, ever?
Yeah, because I think when it comes to fentanyl, it does. Because
got it. Yeah.
If you're selling somebody heroin and they know they're buying heroin and they accidentally overdose, or they're just like, I'm going to be reckless today, that's not exactly the person who gave it to them or sold it to them. Just like you go to a bar, if a bartender overserves you, it's kind of on you because you kept buying drinks. But if that bartender is spiking all of your drinks and unknowingly, you get totally wasted, that's different. And with fentanyl, which is so deadly, it's just so lethal, even the smallest amount, I'm like, yeah, I think we need to go after them because they knowingly sold this, knowing it could cause harm, death, whatever. So that's intention. Even if it's just a manslaughter charge, that's intention of
Yeah.
doing harm and deceiving somebody. So it's like, yeah, I think somebody who is addicted to drugs, they have some of their own accountability. But now with fentanyl and the saturating the markets and everything, I'm like, no, I think they need to do something. They need to, at least they could have looked at my sister's phone and been like, who's the last person that texted her?
Sure.
It could have been as simple as that, but
Could have
nothing.
been pretty low hanging fruit in terms of, investigation and finding somebody responsible, because there is that like trickery aspect to it, right? If your sister had
Mhm.
one intention and then someone is just trying to make money and gives her something else. Again, the parallel to Matthew Perry, they're totally taking advantage of his addiction and saying, like, we're going to make thousands off of this guy, right?
Yeah.
Like
It's like
those were literal messages.
55,000 something. Yeah.
Oh, yeah, just crazy amounts of money. I mean, yeah, I mean, overall, nationwide and for several years with, I think probably most recently, like opioid epidemic and now fentanyl overdose deaths are absolutely on the rise. And for non-celebrities or high-profile folks, these types of prosecutions of going after the supplier are happening more often, but do we hear about it? I mean,
Yeah.
I'm privy to some of that because working in and around law enforcement, my husband's old partner actually at the state level here in California was the first investigator to successfully do an investigation that got a supplier prosecuted,
Mhm.
which was just kind of a like, wow, he figured out like, oh, I can do this and someone will charge him and he'll be held
Mhm.
responsible for this. So I know there are detectives that are following these leads and DAs that are prosecuting, but what do we hear about, right? They're
Mhm.
not putting out press releases, and maybe they should. Like, look at these are the people that are affected in a community that more people can probably relate to than someone living up in the Hollywood Hills. But again, if the victims aren't high profile, where's the interest? And that's that chicken or the egg that we talk about in true crime content creation, right? Like, what are people going to pay attention to in the news? Um, are they just not going to give a shit
Yeah.
anyway, so it doesn't get put out?
And public pressure does push law enforcement to do or
Yes.
behave in different ways. So, hey, Michael Jackson died. We need justice. Matthew Perry died. We need justice.
Yeah.
Whatever it is. And if Justin's
Yeah.
poor little sister died, well, that doesn't even make a blip on their radar. So I get it, but you would think that the opioid crisis and the fentanyl crisis is so bad now that that would be low hanging fruit for them.
Yeah. And I could see a world in which an investigator in your sister's case follows up and follows through as much as possible, keeps you in the loop to where that is. And then, if someone ever asked you, you could say, like, yeah, this investigator looked into it. They took it seriously. They were empathetic. It did or
Yeah.
didn't lead to something. But that's a totally different experience than the one you described.
Yeah.
Right.
I mean, I think most law enforcement, police departments, they should have a PR person. Like they
A
shouldn't get,
100%.
they should have somebody who speaks for them in front of the cameras, makes statements, or even a PR department that interacts and engages with the victims when they're going through an investigation. Because I'm
Yeah.
not dissing law enforcement or police officers, but not all of them have the best bedside manner, and they're not
100%.
going to give the victim
Yeah.
the attention or the customer service that you're expecting, because you're
Absolutely.
you're calling them because you just had the worst day of your life,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
to them it's just another Tuesday. You know.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. A lot of departments have PIOs, public information officers, that have had a little bit more training in
Yeah.
that. Um, but they're usually talking to news cameras. If a department is so resource rich to perhaps have victim advocates that can kind of be a go between, that's also a luxury that not a lot of departments have. But I think it's absolutely needed if you're really talking about building relationships with the community and with victims and survivors. That takes a certain trade craft that you're right. Not all investigators or cops have. You want them to be good in their investigation skills, and that's
Yeah.
what they're hired for, right? But some of
Yeah.
the other stuff might not be their strong suit.
They might be the
Yeah.
best super cop ever, but they
For
can't
sure.
talk to a victim very well. Yeah.
Right, and I think you're also I won't go too far down this particular path, but I think that you're both hitting on something that is really important in that if there was a person who was highly trained in PR and sort of, presenting the message that's more thoughtful and comprehensive, it pushes back against the 24-hour news cycle that somehow manages to politicize things like this. And
Mm.
Perry's death absolutely was politicized by a particular news organization, which is hilarious because every single one of the guys on every team throughout the day they're known to be just like mainlining Zen pouches all throughout the day, you know, because that's legal, right? That's
Yeah.
legal nicotine. It's legal to drink yourselves, into a stupor every night after work. But when you just take
But you
one
can't
step
tell
over the
because of their
line,
over Botox face. No, I'm just kidding.
yeah, exactly, and the filter, right?
Yeah, I think the other piece to this is, once the investigation was, or the individuals were indicted, then you have like the catchy terminology, right? So one of the perpetrators or offenders and alleged offenders in this case is Jasveen Sangya, and they have dubbed her the ketamine queen. So you
Because we
have
always like
this.
a catchy
Oh
a
yeah,
catchy name, right? A catchy
yeah, I'm sure. And this is probably someone who doesn't need a catchy
No.
name because it'll probably be her new Instagram handle. But kind of going with this narrative of like, we didn't know this was happening, but supposedly she is the ketamine supplier to the stars and the celebs, and her house was, they did find a lot of damning evidence in her home. Um, Meth, cocaine, Xanax, the ketamine vials. And then here she was, attending the Golden Globes and the Oscars and having these deep connections. But aside from giving her a nickname, the terminology that I clued into was, they're talking about this being a broad underground criminal network.
Yeah.
And 5 people conspiring to do this is not unlike 5 people in the south end of Los Angeles conspiring to sell drugs to other populations, right?
Mm.
But yet we're going to talk about this being more sophisticated because of who their clientele was.
Well, I love also that they're trying to put this veneer of sophistication on it when Miss
Okay, yeah.
Sangha shows up in court wearing a Nirvana sweatshirt. Like
Yes.
she can't even be
Troubled.
concerned enough to
I
like
know.
take it seriously. And then they
Mhm.
talk about her vast drug emporium
Yes.
as if a home in North Hollywood is sort of like the glamorous area of Los Angeles. And look, sorry, no
No
short,
shade, no
folks.
shade.
Anybody that lives in North Hollywood,
Yeah.
I lived there briefly when I first moved here. But it's again, look at this narrative that gets
Yeah.
promoted about
Yeah.
who she is. And, also like she's selling drugs like meth and coke and Xanax,
Yeah.
Yeah.
and who knows? I mean, it's lucky that more people weren't impacted by that
Yeah.
kind of sloppiness in the sales.
I mean, it's Hollywood and a Hollywood scandal. I mean, who was it?
Yeah.
Heidi Fleiss,
Oh, yeah.
the Hollywood
Hollywood
madam,
madam.
Yeah.
and the ketamine queen, and
Mhm.
they have to have a name for everybody, but it kind of, as you puts a veneer, it puts a veil over the toxicity, the actual negativity, and what these people are actually doing when you're giving them this name. It's like the whole giving serial killers a
Right.
catchy name, or naming the mass shooters, and calling them lone wolves, whatever. It's like, why are
Mhm.
we
Glorifying
glamorizing
it.
this person
Yeah.
in any way? you know
Yeah, it's interesting, when you made kind of the parallel to Heidi Fleiss. I wonder if it was, again, it's always juicy when there's a woman involved.
Mhm.
So kind of latching onto that, running with that. and I didn't hear them giving names to anyone else that
No.
was indicted, or monikers to anyone else. So it's kind of gross when you look at it in terms of,
It's a little
the
sexist
the
there. Yeah.
sexist highlighting of this jet setting, social media woman that is fueling her lifestyle in this way.
Yeah.
We do
Yeah.
for those who don't live in Southern California, we do have many people will be familiar with Angeline. Angeline is a like an iconic character from the 80s, and for decades she had billboards of herself all over Hollywood in her pink Corvette, in sort of like, super tight pants and a big blonde bouffant. She was one of the first self-made social media stars, really.
She was an
Back
influencer before social media was ever a thing. It was just billboards.
Absolutely,
My
absolutely.
my
You can
ex-wife was her for Halloween one year.
Oh, perfect,
I
perfect.
love it.
Yeah, if you see her in her, pink Porsche
Corvette.
Corvette,
Well, it used
actually,
to
her
be a
pink
Corvette. I
Corvette.
don't know what
Yeah.
it is now.
I think it is. I think it's a Corvette now. She will sell calendars out of the trunk and will, give,
She's still around.
she's still around.
I think
But
they did a made-for-TV movie about her.
yeah. But we also, I mean, I guess part of it being that Los Angeles is such an incredibly large metropolitan area. Angeline was the first one, but many people advertise out here on billboards, and they create their own sort of branding. Like we have an attorney who goes by the name Sweet James, and he's all over, the cheaper, or not cheaper, the less expensive advertising opportunities on television and streaming. And then we have um Adriana's Insurance, and it's just this heavily photoshopped, woman with
Woman and
like,
her dog.
and her dog. Her dog's always like dressed up. She's got a beautiful German Shepherd that's always.
LA is so weird.
So, I mean, there's something about, like, I wonder if that was something that is a factor in Sanga's alleged activities, is that, she's going to be this nexus of connectivity for the flow of substances to people who can afford it. But again, I did also want to offer a perspective for discussion, and I'm not justifying it by any means, but many people in the entertainment industry that become the staff or the hangers-on of powerful or celebrity end up really being victims of their own behavioral drift.
Sure.
Like, I think we can all agree that his personal assistants, like, if you're not a medical professional, you don't give injections to people no matter what.
Yeah.
And you had a choice, or there are a lot of things I don't know about this. I mean, there's a lot of unknown information, but let's just kind of imagine a situation like this. You, in that position, always have the opportunity to say, I cannot do this.
Yeah.
I'm going to have to walk away. And then the person will beg, or they'll offer more money, or they'll threaten. Who knows? There's any number of things that can happen, but you always have a choice. And being aware that you have a choice is a lot more powerful in that moment than trying to fix it after someone has died. But again, we live in a large metropolitan area with this glamour and mystique around the world of entertainment, and there are people that are desperate to stay in it for whatever reason. But there's a lot of culpability here.
Yeah. And LA's not cheap. LA's
No.
pretty expensive. So his personal assistant, I don't want to lose my job.
Well,
Right.
sure.
I
And
I
he'd
need,
probably say, I'll pay someone else who will do it.
yeah, you don't do it, somebody else will.
Yeah.
And then, to your other point of sorry, um I lost my train of thought with the Angeline thing. Um,
Scott does that.
I'm
Yeah.
so sorry. Like, I can pull in the most obscure, weird ADHD ramblings into these things.
Yeah. I had a couple thoughts while you were talking from the beginning until now. You were talking about depression and walking on a rug. And I actually tell people, think of tall grass and you keep walking the same path and wearing out a trail. and then that's your train of thought, or your synapses are going there. And then something like ketamine or microdosing mushrooms, whatever,
Yeah.
resets all the grass, makes
Yep.
it all grow again, and gives you that choice to cut a new path, as opposed to going down the same one you have kept going down.
Yeah.
And you can totally steal that analogy.
No,
It's fine.
it's a great
Yeah.
analogy. I love that one.
Yeah.
Another one I've used is, if you picture an old time farmer using a plow and a mule,
Yeah.
except that
Mhm.
at the end of the row, instead of going over a foot and creating another furrow, he goes back in the same furrow, and it just digs
Yeah.
down deeper and deeper and deeper. But whatever metaphor, whatever, visualization we use to describe this, one thing I definitely want to I want to highlight, or I want to add on to what we've said about any treatment that is successful, like, because it looks like ketamine and microdosing of mild hallucinogens, as well as, electroconvulsive therapy has made a comeback that is
Mhm.
very popular. We've got transcranial magnetic stimulation that is off the charts successful for a number of things. However, if you think of it as a magic bean, it's just going to be a magic bean. What it's any of those treatments is to help your brain reset so that you actually can use the tools that are out there. So
Yeah.
it's like if you have an empty toolbox by your side for coping skills, for the vicissitudes of life, basically, and then you are able to take a substance or do something, some kind of treatment that resets the baseline, that's great. But if all you know is your old patterns, you're going to go back, so that's an important part of this, is that this is not in place of tools. It's to make space so that you can use those tools.
Absolutely. Yeah. That's because I was suffering with depression for probably about 5 to 8 years ish, and tried Prozac, tried a bunch of SSRIs, tried a ton of stuff. And I actually, about a year ago, tried ketamine treatment. And I'd been to 3 different therapists, I'd been to counselors, all kinds of people. And they gave me the best advice, tools, and everything. But when all you're thinking about is, why am I even alive? Do
Yeah.
I even want to be around tomorrow? It doesn't matter what somebody says to you. And ketamine, as much as I just used the mail order, fly by night place, it actually did shut down all of that negative thought. And then I was allowed to just be like, what am I going to choose to do with my day today that's not falling back into my old pattern, that's not negative, that's not what I've been used to? And it's very important. And I guess that's why I really wanted to talk about this, because I'm like, they're really stigmatizing this thing that possibly has killed 138 to 900 people a year. And then if somebody is suffering with depression, somebody is suffering with PTSD, whatever it is, and then they're like, well, Matthew Perry died from that, I don't want to try that.
Right.
Well, it's just another thing you can try. And I don't want people to be opposed to it. It might not work for them, like
Well,
Prozac,
look,
Yeah.
you also had an experience that I'm not going to say it's uncommon, because it's not uncommon, but you just shared with us that in that moment of relief, in that, there's a moment of relief where the symptoms are remitting, and you're able to say for yourself, I have a choice. I need to take steps, and I'm going to do it, which is freaking awesome. And I'm so happy that you found your way back. And there are some people that
Yeah.
can get alleviation of symptoms and then not know what to do.
Mhm.
So
Yeah.
we need to have things in place for those people as well. And you know, we will never know how many therapists someone like Matthew Perry has been to, who has said, yes, we will do this. We'll do this, but you have to do this as well. Like, you
Yeah.
have to do this, you
Mhm.
have to do this, you have to, like, all the basics, the journaling, the CBT exercises, all these things you have to do to change your natural response to want to go back into that path that you already cut. Yeah, it's everybody's going to have a different road back from illness, from mental illness, from depression, from anxiety, from addiction.
Yeah. You can't just go to therapy and expect I'm going to get better just by doing this one thing.
Just by showing up. Yeah.
Yeah. Just, you have to, as they say, put in the work. But what does putting in the work mean? And it's setting that intention, okay, you take Prozac or you take ketamine. Now you're able to think more clearly or have this moment of clarity. Now you go to that therapist or you think about all the therapists, advice and tools that he gave you. And yeah, it all has to coincide with each other
Yes.
and hand in hand. And that's where I think even someone like Matthew Perry, who had struggled with addiction and struggled with depression, he just traded one thing in for another, and he wasn't using it to get better. He was just swapping it out for another addiction. And sadly, all the people surrounding him totally enabled him and took advantage of him. And then here we have a headline: he dies from a ketamine overdose, and Justin's pissed off.
And here we are talking about it. Well, so as of it stands right now, January 2025, this case is still ongoing. I'm sure we will all follow it to see what happens. Justin, always a pleasure to dig into the weeds or the grass and talk about some of these cool nuances in the crime and criminal justice world with you. Thanks so much for your time.
Hey, thank you for having me on. And I always love your guys' input because I feel like I always learn something every time I talk to you.
Thanks so much. Dr. Scott, anything you need to end with?
No, just again, thank you so much for coming on the show. We always have such great conversations, and let's keep doing it.
Yeah, absolutely.
All right, everyone. Well, be safe no matter where you are, whether there's smoke in your air or it is cold AF. Take care of yourselves, be safe, and we will. Are we ending this with our little end catchphrase now that this is one of our episodes, Scott?
I guess so.
Yeah. Okay. We'll see you guys next time on LA
Not So
Confidential. Bye, guys.
Bye, folks.
Awesome.